Unassuming Saturday where we kick off our training shoes and see connections everywhere. I'm Shifu Pain, and boy, today do we have a treat for you!
Live and in person, the event to end all events. It's East versus West, Beast versus Beast. Whose homeboy will come out on top? Western Dragons against Eastern Dragons. This is sure to be a great video. So now, with all our combatants in place, we get set, get pumped, and wait.
What's the difference between these guys? Where are the stats, the history, the experience? How are we supposed to be invested in these guys if we don't know anything about them? Let's take a look at the history behind these two different forms of dragons and see what it is that we're dealing with.
Dragons have been a concept as far-reaching as water, it seems. Nearly every major culture and civilization has them in some form or another. Let's start with Western dragons, and first ask, what does dragon even mean? The etymology of the word dragon can be traced back to ancient Greece, with dragon meaning dragon.
You stole that joke from OSP! Nonsense! It's not stealing if you acknowledge where you got it! Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to curate an exhibit of the British Museum.
Dragon technically means great serpent or large serpent, which largely describes the primary visual trait of dragons. So long as they're serpent-like, they're a dragon. As the name is Greek, let's take a look at the Greek versions of dragons. Ancient Greece had a bunch of serpentine creatures and monsters. There's Python, a giant snake that lived at the center of the earth who was killed by Apollo for changing reasons depending on who you ask. There's Typhon, the child of Gaia and Tartarus. That's basically the ancient Greek Godzilla threat-wise. But most relevant to today, we have two more well-known additions, with the Lernaean Hydra and Ladon, the serpent that guards the apples of the Hesperides, both being parts of the labors of Heracles. The Hydra is probably more well-known, as the serpentine monster that grows two heads each time you cut one off.
Will you forget the head-slicing thing?
And aside from them being threats and obstacles to overcome on Heracles' quest to complete his labors, either by being a roadblock or by being the actual labor, there's not a lot that really connects them with the standard Western dragon we all know. How do we get from snake monster to fire-breathing force of nature?
Let's talk Tolkien.
J.R.R. Tolkien, writer of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, had a lot of thoughts and theories about dragons, with one even featuring in The Hobbit,
As seen in The Desolation of Smaug.
And this is where we find the quintessential depiction of dragons. Serpentine, wings, scales, fire breath, pile of gold, etc.
And the major influences for Tolkien were two sources, the Volsunga Saga and Beowulf.
The Volsunga saga, dated to around 1270, has the story of Fafnir. The story goes that a guy named Hrevmir went to Odin demanding compensation for the loss of one of his sons. Odin, the guy all Western mythology leads to, cursed the gold. This curse took effect when Fafnir, another of Hrevmir's sons, got greedy and killed his father to get his hands on said gold. The curse turned Fafnir into a dragon as he lay on this pile of gold. Fafnir was eventually killed and subsequently changed back into a human by Sigurd, a Norse hero who is suspected to have been the Norwegian version of the German hero Siegfried. It's kind of obvious that the story is an allegory for the sins of greed, but there's also the carryover traits of a pile of gold or hoarding in general, a curse of some variety, and the dragon as a foe to vanquish when Sigurd enters the picture. Meanwhile, the story of Beowulf ends with a dragon attack that utterly curb stomps the before then superhuman Beowulf. The dragon breathes fire and has a venomous bite that kills the Norse hero with a bite to the neck. We again see some carryover traits here. The fire breath is certainly one, but another is the allegory of death or mortality. Up until the dragon comes in, Beowulf is untouchable, but as soon as the dragon comes in, Beowulf sweats profusely, continually fighting and holding back to allude to the fighting off of his own mortality until it inevitably comes to claim him.
With these traits, the quintessential image of dragons came into focus in the 20th century with Tolkien. Well, that and the story of St. George.
St. George is the patron saint of England, a figure known for courage and virtue, with his story going that during the Crusades,
it doesn't say which, so we'll just call it the Crusades and move on.
George comes across a village that's constantly under attack by a dragon that asks for a maiden to eat semi-regularly, and this time it's the king's daughter. Immediately needing to assert the valor of the Britons, George rides into the dragon's land to save the princess. He eventually stabs the dragon in the side, after breaking both his armor and his spear in the effort.
Okay, so that story again brings in the idea of a threat to fight, as well as saving a princess from a giant scary monster. We've seen that a dozen times. But what is new is how the battling of said dragon becomes a journey of perseverance.
With every attack George tries, he comes up short, continually fighting and not giving up until he finds that opening, and in the process becoming the patron saint of England and one more point to dick measure on for England. As if we didn't have enough.
Oh, your saint was all about charity and the rebirth of the soul. Ha! Ours killed a dragon! So we now have the measure of the Western dragon, a symbol of death and mortality. A hoarding force of nature that can also be analogous to greed, as well as the overwhelming odds to persevere against. So with that, let's take a look at the other contender in our battle, the Eastern Dragon.
While the Western Dragon, artist interpretation aside, has the general design of big snake with wings and a lot of fire, the Eastern Dragon has a very specific design with a snake body, deer antlers, eagle talons, tiger souls, and carp scales. Instead of the association to fire and death, Eastern Dragons are far more benevolent and more closely linked to water. An omen of luck, intellect, power, as well as a guardian and protector of heaven, dragons are also a symbol for evolution and ki, the energy that is stated to flow through all living things. Dragons were revered more so as deities than monstrous forces of nature. The dragon is everywhere on architecture, stone and jade carvings, art, literature, fashion, dance, theatre.
Something as ingrained in the culture as this had to start out from somewhere, so where did the concept come from?
The dragon was a symbol of the first emperor of China, King Shi Huan, who was even called the Dragon Emperor. During his reign of 246 to 210 BC, he was heavily linked to the dragon, which was a symbol of power and probably was also linked to his goal of seeking immortality. And since that time, the dragon has been linked irrevocably to the emperor, with some even theorizing at the time that the Dragon Emperor was descended from dragons.
Hey, do you think this guy had a bit of hubris to him? Nah, neither did I.
But it seems the Chinese dragon goes a lot further than that, because jade carvings and busts of dragons have been found that date back as far as the 5th millennium BCE, with a bust that was found at the Henan province in 1987. There's a theory that due to the relative similarity the image of the dragon throughout the thousands of years of its existence, that the dragon was a totem symbolizing the bringing together of several tribes in the Yellow River Valley by the legendary figure of the Yellow Emperor. Hence why the dragon is comprised of several specific animals, and that any change has been just the cleaning up and polishing of the original image.
The problem is that the supposed reign of the Yellow Emperor was said to be between 2698 and 2598 BC.
So the dragons found at Henan seem to be some earlier form of the dragon. As far as can be told, these earlier dragons were basically fancy snakes.
So where did that initial idea even come from? Dinosaurs!
There's the documentation from Changju in roughly 300 BC in the Sichuan province that there had been a discovery of dragon bones being displayed and shown off and such. Not to mention being used both in the past and today as medicine, which I bet makes our paleontologists in the audience squirm. There is also the modern translation of dinosaur as Konglong, or Terror Dragon.
By God, a smoking gun!
So there you have it. The Chinese dragon was a discovery of dinosaur bones that spiraled into a totem for the unification of states and then became the standardized symbol for the Chinese monarchy. Now that we know our combatants better, let's get ourselves ready, set, and primed for this spectacular demonstration of... Okay guys, let's cut it.
I'm sorry, but now that we've actually dissected the history and mythology behind these guys, there doesn't really seem to be much of a point, because this is not the point.
No matter what dragon shows up, the importance lies in them being a part of the story, interacting with the environment or characters, having an impact on the wider context, whether as a destructive force of nature that signifies death or a benevolent segment of nature that ties into the spirituality of its culture. We shouldn't compare dragons because that's not what they're there for. Maybe it's better to just see them, make an appearance in a story and have fun with them in any iteration, shape or size.
So with that in mind, there's really no point in having an actual fight now. Wait! I know of two people that may not be dragons, but have the title of dragon, and we've wanted to see them go up against each other for years!
First, the Grand Master of the White Lotus, former General of the Fire Nation, and Master of the Tea Leaves, the Dragon of the West, Iroh! And his opponent, the one with the Fist of Fury, wielder of the Nunchuck and seminal icon for millions, the Dragon, Bruce Lee!
Would you like some tea first? I'd love some.
Now I want a good clean fight. No biting, no crotch shots, no gouging. Now to your corners. Get ready, and fight!